So because we're making a difference and we've introduced a bill in South Australia to save healthy, viable babies up to 23 weeks, the knives are out and every politician in the country has received a letter about yours truly from the so-called TFMR community. Now, who are the TFMR community, you might be wondering, and what are they saying about me, and why is it all just total BS? Well, that's today on the Dr. Jo Show. So before we get into this letter that every politician in the country has got about me, could I please ask that if you're new here or returning but haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our channel. All right. So I got this forwarded to me by a politician, but I've also had it from a few others because everybody's getting it. And it's a letter from this group that are calling themselves the TFMR Community. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the acronym TFMR, it's Termination for Medical Reasons. It's a bullshit acronym that the abortion lobby has thought up to justify abortion up to birth and for killing disabled babies in particular, although now the acronym's been broadened to even allow, termination of medical reasons actually encompasses women with a mental health condition who are killing a perfectly healthy baby right up until birth when they could just as easily deliver that baby alive. Connie Benares is going to go nuts because I just used the word just. It's fun poking the bear with Connie. You'll have to watch that episode. So in this letter, they say TFMR Community is made up of parents who have made the heartbreaking decision to end much wanted pregnancies due to severe or lethal medical diagnoses. It is a community no one wishes to belong to. So that's how they would talk about themselves. Now, my heart goes out to any mother who has, and any parent who has that diagnosis after the 20-week scan that their baby has some kind of disability, perhaps even a lethal disability, but it doesn't diminish from the fact that that is still just a baby, a disabled baby, or a baby who in all likelihood is going to die because they've got a really severe condition, but they're still just a baby. And so, my position about this TFMR community, which is just pro-abortion, is, maybe it makes yourself feel better about yourself because you've got an acronym, but it doesn't take away from the fact that this is a lobby group aimed at killing babies. Now, what's really interesting is there's no name. This is like an anonymous email address. It's like Kath@TFMR community@gmail.com. There's no website. That's the thing about these like anonymous activist trolling types. Like this could honestly just be the handful of three. Like I've got 3 TikTok activists who have accounts about me. I think it's about 3 now. It was 1, but they seem to be rising, which I think is a sign of our success, guys. But it could literally just be them calling themselves the TFMR community. Nobody knows. But anyway, let's go through the letter. So they wrote, "We are writing to express our deep concern about the ongoing attempts by Joanna Howe and her supporters," that's you guys, "to influence legislation that would restrict abortion access in Australia." So they've got their knickers in a twist because, we want to protect babies from 23 weeks with Sarah's bill. And they write, "Miss Howe's campaign relies on misinformation, misuse statistics and the manipulation of families' lived experience to create a false narrative. The language she uses is not only deeply hurtful to families like ours, it is dangerous." So they can't even put their names to it, so we really don't know who their families are. "It frames complex medical and personal circumstances in simplistic, misleading terms such as protecting babies." They've got that in inverted commas. Sorry, I just have to laugh. How can they even just... they're really upset at me because I'm talking about protecting babies. "Making proposals sound compassionate when the consequences are anything but." Well, if the baby gets to live and not have their heart brutally injected with poison, I reckon that is probably compassionate. And then they write, "We're not asking you to change your personal views on abortion. Termination, particularly for medical reasons, is a deeply personal and complex decision." And that's what you'll find there, guys. They're not just supportive of termination for disabled babies. They're not just into eugenics. They're actually for termination full stop. And that's why they say that, termination particularly for medical reasons, because they wouldn't want to diminish ever a woman's right to choose to kill her baby right up until birth. That's the side these people are on. They're abortion activists. That's why they've spent all this time writing this letter. Then they've written, "What we are asking is this. If you are ever approached by Miss Howe or others," now this is in bold, "so if you are ever approached by Miss Howe or others citing shocking stories or statistics, please do not accept them at face value. Check the evidence. Question the numbers, consult the experts." Well, sorry, I just wanted to say that because of the whole COVID, consult the experts. No, they said consult peak medical bodies. And most importantly, listen to those with lived experience. Well, we can't listen to the babies, can we? The babies who have been brutally killed because of this TFMR agenda. We're not listening to their lived experience. So then they write, Joanna Howe is a law professor from South Australia. She frequently uses the word doctor without clarifying that she has no medical qualifications or training. Well, here's the thing, guys, and listen in if you're from the TFMR community, whatever the fuck that is. This is the thing. I wouldn't claim to be a medical doctor because that would literally disqualify me from talking about all of the things that I talk about. On this channel and in my work, I talk about the law. I talk about the way abortion is regulated under Australian law and how this needs to change. And I talk about the policy guidelines, the legal frameworks. I help draft bills. Like, my work is purely about legislation affecting an area of medicine. Well, they talk about it as an area of medicine when really it's just an area of like killing, because, you know, the Hippocratic Oath doesn't vibe at all with abortion because it's killing human beings, and medicine should be about saving babies. But even so, I never come to this from a medical perspective. I come to it from a legal perspective. And in fact, the laws introducing abortion up to birth in every Australian state, particularly in Victoria, Queensland and South Australia, they were preceded by deep legal reviews by pro-abortion scholars, so-called law reform commissions, with a pro-abortion bias, arguing that we need abortion up to birth laws. So, you know, this is not like some big, come to Jesus moment. Oh, you've got me. I'm not a medical doctor. It's actually a good thing that I'm not a medical doctor. I wouldn't have the expertise to do this YouTube channel and to do this work if I was, because I'm talking about abortion law. And if I was a medical doctor, I wouldn't even have the practical experience in research that I have because I'm an academic, a doctor of law who researches law and policy and cases. You know, like, I just wouldn't be able to do this work if I was meeting patients and treating patients. The letter goes on. It says, in recent years, she's become a leading anti-abortion campaigner. Her strategy involves working with sympathetic MPs, those who are often aligned by religious views, are male, and who believe they know what they would do if ever faced with the heartbreaking situation of being told their much-loved baby their partner is pregnant with has a severe medical condition. Ms. Howe influences those MPs to introduce bills based on distorted statistics, selective stories and emotive rhetoric. Ms. Howe has even helped draft the wording of the bills. Shock horror for a legal academic to help draft the wording of bills. On the surface, the bills can sound compassionate by using hyperbolic and triggering language, but the bills are not grounded in clinical reality and would have devastating, and that's underlined and in bold, real-world impacts on families already in crisis. So, you know, they're really upset because I'm working with MPs and some of these MPs happen to be men. Well, like that 1 in 2 people tend to be of one or the other genders. So that's traditionally been the case until we've got to where we are now. But, you know, like, of course I work with Matt Canavan, Alex Antic, Ben Hood, Sarah Game. There's a woman, you know, like, it's just Marika Gronfeld in WA, woman, alert. You know, like, this is just so stupid. Like, these are just the tropes that they love to throw from the pro-abortion side to our side. The letter goes on and it says, recently in South Australia, a bill influenced by Miss Howe's material and introduced by Ben Wood, I can't even get that right, was narrowly defeated by just 1 vote. This was probably written by a uni student, I reckon. This was alarming proof of how misinformation can sway decision-making, even when opposed by every major medical body. So, like, you know, this is obviously the basis for, like, the left trying to control social media. This whole, you know, they got so close to controlling women's bodies because of misinformation. And they say every major medical body, as if that's evidence of anything. The medical peak bodies have been captured by an abortion ideology. RANZCOG is literally at a point in its history where it is the most pro-abortion it has ever been. They're embedding it into all of the training for doctors. It's just horrific, and I've had so many doctors reach out who are concerned about this. They're so ideologically in favour of abortion that they wanted the Amanda Conn Greens bill to pass. They said that every hospital should have to provide abortions. They wanted to force doctors, Catholic and Christian doctors, to perform abortions against their will at these hospitals, tying funding to the performance of abortion. RANZCOG is not a neutral player. Like, the peak body for OBGYNs in this country is not a neutral player in this. So for this, you know, so-called TFMR community of abortion activists saying you've got to trust the medical peak bodies, well, they're just captured. They're just part of your side. This is the establishment. This is the pro-abortion establishment. When Wilberforce was going up against slavery, in his battle to end slavery, he was up against the establishment. There was so much money, the industry, the whole, trade was based on, everyone's profits was based on slavery. And so, all of these politicians being bought off by this industry, it's where their wealth came from. And he was going up against all that. That's what we're doing here today. We're going up against this very wealthy establishment. And of course, they've got their experts who write their reports. But, this letter is wrong anyway, because Pro-Life Health Professionals Australia wrote to every MP last year in the debate on the Ben Hood bill, and they clearly said that, at 28 weeks, and that, remember, that organisation is headed by Dr. Melissa Lai, who's a senior neonatologist in Queensland. So her job is to look after little babies who are very sick after birth. That's literally her job. And so, she and that organisation produced a fact sheet and a letter to all members of parliament clearly articulating that this bill was in the best interest of children, because it meant that they weren't being injected with poison, but they could be delivered early and alive and then given care in the NICU and given proper support. So even that point about, major medical bodies, all of them in unisons, agreeing with this against the bill. That just isn't true. The letter goes on, this bill would have made late-term abortions illegal after 27 weeks, regardless of circumstance. Well, gosh, what kind of monster supports killing babies after 27 weeks? It says forced women to deliver babies alive, even when doctors agreed survival was impossible or would mean suffering for the baby, for the family, and for the medical professionals. Goodness me. So, essentially what this all boils down to is these very psychotic people think that the right thing to do, if you've got a very sick baby. So let's take our worst case scenario. We've got a baby who's very sick, who is not going to survive. What they're saying is we should inject that baby in the left ventricle of the heart with poison, causing searing agony. It causes a cardiac arrest. It's horrific for these babies. On death row, when they inject that same agent into the prisoners before they kill them, they give them sedation and pain relief first. None of that happens to these babies. And yet this so-called TFMR community reckons it's uncompassionate to deliver these babies alive and give them palliative care. I've spoken to Dr. Melissa Lai about this, and the reality is sick babies are born all the time. I've interviewed Steph and Brad on my channel. You can check out the interview. Their little baby was very, very sick, lived for 54 days, and in that time was loved and cared and cherished and given palliative care, so that baby was not in pain. But that baby wasn't just, injected brutally in the heart with poison in the dead of the night, or suddenly just their life stripped from them in a brutal way, delivered dead, and then, either buried or dumped in a bin, which is legal in South Australia with no name, and I know some of these parents, they name their child, they do the handprints and the footprints, but I've spoken to the midwives. Midwives have told me they hate participating in those bereavement gestures because they just feel like it's so hollow, it's so fake that these babies were brutally killed in utero, and then the mums want their photo ops with them after birth. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I've had midwives tell me that they feel so traumatized by being forced to do that in the name of healthcare. But all of this is kind of irrelevant anyway. I mean, fast forward a couple of months and this baby's been born, they're 3 months old. No one is saying the compassionate response to a 3-month-old child who's suddenly been diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, that the compassionate response is to inject that baby's heart with poison and to watch them have a heart attack and then die. Nobody's saying that, because we just all know how barbaric that is. Or the situation where your 3-year-old gets diagnosed with cancer. What's the response? You get a doctor to come in and put her down for medical reasons, a doctor to kill her brutally because you want to alleviate her suffering. No, that's not what we would do, right? We would not do that. No one's thinking or advocating that we should do that. These people are psychotic. And, they go on, they say compelling doctors to provide futile treatment, overriding medical judgment, parental choice and ethical care. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's saying that you have to save a really, really sick baby who's going to die. All we're asking for is that you don't kill the baby. It should be obvious that what we're fighting for is just not killing. We're not saying that doctors have to save this baby. We're saying that the doctors have to do what they always do, which is what is in the best interest of the child, of the patient. And we're just saying we don't kill them. And then it says proposed adoption of babies born with catastrophic conditions, despite the reality that Australia's adoption system is already stretched and governments would be forced to cover lifelong medical costs. Well, essentially, that's code for it would be a burden, It would cost us more to have to look after disabled people, so we should just kill them. I mean, this nonsense about the adoption system or, being strained, that's just nonsense. That's the foster care system, which is a mess. But if a baby is born and the mother doesn't want them and there's no possibility of family reunion, which would be the case for these babies, well, they would just go into an adoption system. And there's hundreds of Australian couples wanting to adopt, and they're having to go overseas to adopt because there's no babies being born here. And then just finally, the final point with all of this, so-called catastrophic conditions because of Ben Wood's bill. The thing is this, most of these babies that are being killed through a late-term abortion are perfectly healthy, 75%. And, last year when the left-wing media just couldn't handle that a pro-life bill was being introduced, they searched and searched to try and find somebody with a tragic story who they said would be harmed if this bill passed. And they found Taylor Jane, who's this lifelong feminist, and, she says in this article, in this interview, I would have killed myself if I had to have my baby. And, therefore, what she's essentially saying is you guys, doctors, need to kill my baby in this brutal way because, my life's more important. I'm the privileged one. And they couldn't, there was none of this TFMR bullshit. The majority of these babies are not really, really sick and going to die. The vast majority of babies that are killed in late-term abortions are perfectly healthy or have a minor disability. They then go on to say, one of Ms Howe's most damaging claims is that in Australia, thousands of babies are born alive and left to die. This is a deliberate distortion of TFMR families' experience. To start with, those statistics simply don't exist. Well, that's not true. There was a question asked on Notice by Robbie Katter to Shannon Fentinan, the Minister for Health in Queensland. It showed that 49 babies survived their abortion. And then under Queensland law, they're not entitled to equal treatment under the law. In fact, Queensland law at the time said do not give life-sustaining treatment if these babies survive. That's still the law of the day in the Northern Territory. And so, there are statistics just because we don't advertise them. And then, you have to really dig to find them. They exist. These are people. This, if anything, is an indication that there's a genocide going on is the cover-up. The fact that we just don't hear about these babies. We don't even know them as a statistic because it's not publicised. Until I did this work, I don't think people knew about it to any great degree. And, we're now reaching 7 to 10 million people a month through my 5 channels. So that is really awesome that together we're getting the word out. But these guys, they want to continue to cover up. They say to start, these statistics simply don't exist. And then she says, then they go on to say, one case she regularly cites is from 20 years ago, baby Jessica, where guidelines were not followed. An investigation occurred, changes were made, and it has not been repeated. If such events were truly common, they would not stand out as a singular example decades later. I mean, honestly, you can't even make this stuff up. If they'd actually read the coroner's report on Jessica Jane by Greg Kavanagh, it clearly says there's an absence of guidelines. In that situation, Jessica survives her abortion and she's born little baby girl, very happy little baby girl, good ABCAS scores, doing well. Nurse Williams, who delivers her, was expecting to deliver a dead baby. She calls the abortionist to ask, what do I do? Because there were no guidelines. It even says in the coroner's report, Nurse Williams looked to see if there's anything that could guide what she does. There was no guidance from the abortionist. There was nothing written down. So she wraps baby Jessica, puts her on a metal kidney dish in an empty room where Jessica lies for 80 minutes, struggling to breathe, crying, whimpering. Eventually Jessica dies. And Greg Kavanagh, the coroner in that case, I've talked to him on the phone and I've read the judgment. He's absolutely scathing about the absence of guidelines about what to do in this situation. And he says that in the Northern Territory, there should be clear guidelines that there's equal treatment if a baby survives their abortion, that they should be treated like any other baby born in that state. Instead, I'll flick up the guidelines on the screen for you now. These are the Northern Territory termination of pregnancy guidelines today. In, September 2025. This is what the policy is in the Northern Territory. It says, do not give life-sustaining treatment if a live birth occurs. So these people are saying, an investigation occurred, changes were made, and it has not been repeated. That is not true. No changes were made. And then they said if such events were truly common, they would stand out as a singular example decades later. They would not stand out. Well, the thing is, there is a cover-up on this. The West Australian Parliament, for example, literally voted when they introduced abortion up to birth. Amber Jade Sanderson was so sick, the Labor Minister for Health, that she put in there a provision that said if babies survive their abortion, there shouldn't be a referral to the coroner. In other words, there should just be a cover-up so we don't know who they are. And the thing is, we only find about these cases when a whistleblower says something or when something happens that allows us to find out about it. So, for example, we know the raw data in certain states about babies who survive their abortion and are left to die, but we don't know the stories. We know Jessica's story because of the coroner's report. We know the baby at Westmead Hospital who was dumped in a bin in the same year as Jessica. We know about that because of the coroner's report. That baby was dumped in a bin while still breathing and alive, so we know about that. But then we also know that in Brisbane in 2020, there was a little baby girl, Xantha, who survived her abortion at 19 weeks. She had Down syndrome, which is why her parents went in to kill her. She survived her abortion. She was dumped in an empty room. She lay on a kidney dish for 7 minutes. We know about that because the mum wanted to commit suicide, and that's why the Courier Mail reported on it. So there was an inadvertent reporting about Xantha in that case. So, there's a massive cover-up. Sometimes the parents aren't even told that their baby survived the abortion. Xantha's mum wasn't told. That's apparent in that story. And the academic literature clearly shows that if you don't do feticide, 1 in 2 babies will survive their abortion. And the average survival time is 32 minutes. One baby in that particular study survived for 241 minutes. And there's even a Canadian study of over 13,000 abortions. So it's the biggest longitudinal study about live births following abortion that we have. It showed that one baby in that study survived for 24 hours following their abortion. So what's laughable here is these people are saying, don't listen to Miss Joanna Howe and her supporters, but they just don't know the basic facts. They're part of the abortion establishment. They're part of the cover-up. They're either deliberately lying or they're just plain ignorant, and they're pursuing an agenda that just allows the annihilation of children right up until birth. And so they conclude by saying, we urge you do not take any communications from Miss Howe, her supporters, or the proposed bills at face value. Consult medical experts. Read the positions of RANZCOG and other peak health bodies. Listen to families who have lived this reality. We are not pro-abortion. None of us chose this path. We are parents who made devastating decisions out of love, compassion, and necessity, with hope, the termination for medical reasons community. So they're probably not parents at all, guys. They're probably just these crazy, unhinged TikTok activists who love to make video after video after video about me and who just write to my university, just complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint to try and get me sacked. That's literally where this is coming from. They've now taken the time to write to every single politician in the country. It is just so pathetic. It's also not going to stop us. So to be really clear, something like this, which is just so easily taken apart, you're going to have to do a lot better than that, guys. If you really want to come at me, perhaps try the truth, try to actually find some true things to say, because that would probably be a little bit more persuasive. All of this to say, this is just the gatekeeping from the establishment. Debbie Garrett's book, Alarmist Gatekeeping, traces how anyone that ever speaks up about abortion in Australia up until this point has always been attacked and effectively cancelled by these kinds of people, these activists. You can watch my YouTube interview with her. It's really, really good. But, the reality is we've got a new dynamic. There's a new movement in town. We're not going to be cowed. We're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be silenced. We're not going to be cancelled. We're going to keep on going. We're going to fight for these babies. Don't forget our rally on September the 17th in Adelaide to speak up for these little babies. I really hope you can make it. And thank you so much again for watching today. That's Today on The Dr. Jo Show.